I want to steer the conversation now towards how pastors and churches can support medical practitioners in this particular season. And so I'm wondering if you, too, can help me understand what sort of employment discrimination, what sort of pressure from the college are you likely to experience in the next couple of years as this issue is worked out?
I probably won't, because I'm in the operating room all the time.
Mm-hmm.
However, as part of Christian Medical and Dental Society, I feel the pressure others are receiving already, not necessarily over the euthanasia question, but on conscious issues around birth control and abortion.
Right.
And so I already feel their angst about these things. There was a group in Ottawa who were brought before the courts, or sorry, the college.
Yes.
And it's a very painful process, and people look at possibly having to give up their career because of it.
Well, and so help me understand that. First of all, what specialists right now are most on the front lines in this issue?
Family physicians?
Family physicians.
Family physicians, yeah.
Yeah.
To an extent, emergency physicians, to an extent, OBGYNs.
Mm-hmm.
By extension, internists, also by extension, anesthetists, if a procedure is going on that you object to. Those would be the main ones, I'd say.
And right now, what happens? So walk me through this. Right now, so imagine that I'm a patient in Simcoe County, and I go in, and let's imagine that you're my GP, and I say to you that I have I meet the criteria, or at least in my opinion I do. I'm experiencing terrible suffering, and I ask to be referred to this procedure, and let's say that you don't feel able to do that. What is likely to happen? In theory, could you not just say, "Hey, listen, I don't think you meet the criteria. I'm looking at the criteria. You don't meet the criteria, so I don't feel prepared to respond to that." Are you exposing yourself to legal risk right now?
Yeah.
And what will that look like? So walk me through that. How will that happen? So now I'm angry, and so what do? I call the Ontario, or I call the physicians and surgeons, the College of Physicians,
yeah.
And what happens now?
Well, if a patient does not like the way that I take care of them, or if they have a complaint against which I've handled the situation, they can make a complaint. That's a frighteningly easy process in this province. Following the complaint, I will be notified that a complaint has been made against me. Where following that, quickly I will take legal counsel and advice. Before it gets to that stage, though, if a patient comes in to see me and asks me, "Hey doc, I have this condition, it sucks, I want to end my life."
Right.
That provides me an opportunity to sit down and talk with them. Sit down and say, "This is what's going on, this is physiologically what's going to happen.
Right.
This is what's going to happen probably to your emotional state. And this is how I can care for you."
Right.
We will go through the menu of options that I have at my disposal that I'm comfortable using, and emphasize that I will walk with them through this palliative journey. If they are adamant that they want medical assistance in dying, I can explore that option with them as well, highlighting the various pieces of legislation that have been passed, as well as the college guidelines that I must adhere to. Following a full discussion of that, I will ask them to think about it. I will not make a hasty decision. I will not make a recommendation one way or another. I'll ask them to think about it. Come back to my office next week once you've given this more thought. Upon returning to my office, perhaps in a week or two after they've read information that I've given them, we can come to a conclusion, and we can come to more of an agreement whereby it's not part of my menu of services that I can offer you. I cannot write down on a letter saying, "Please see this patient for medical assistance in dying," but I can give you a phone number whereby you can initiate the process yourself.
Now, suppose they're not happy with that level of care, and so they make the complaint. Do you have the opportunity to argue from your perspective before the college?
Yeah, so what would happen is that I would gain legal counsel, and basically we would go back and forth. But I don't think any specific decision on my particular situation, if it arose, would be judged until this CMDS thing has been sorted out through the courts.
Okay. So let's suppose, just for a second, I want people to understand the risks and the pressures that are being faced by physicians in the workplace. You know, by and large, even in the Bible, we see the first wave of persecution is generally employment discrimination, right? In Jesus' letter to the church in Thyatira, you know, we're talking about employment discrimination. It's right there. We were seeing it in 1 Peter in the churches of Bithynia and Pontus. So that tends to be the first wave. And how that wave plays out tends to have tremendous repercussions for the waves that come behind. So I just want people to understand exactly what we're likely looking at. So suppose that this legislation that's going through the courts right now in Ontario doesn't come back in the favor of the Christian Medical and Dental Association or Society. How will your case, the hypothetical case we've worked out, how will that likely play out at the college level? Will they be able to sanction you, revoke credentials? Are there legal ramifications? Are there financial ramifications? How does that work?
All of the above, really. If the ruling, the current CMDS court that's before the courts right now doesn't go in a positive way, and if it's deemed that, you know, a physician like myself in family practice must make that referral, I could lose my license.
Okay.
I could also be subject to civil litigation if the patient decides to sue me outside of the realm of the college.
Because they were exposed to additional suffering.
Precisely.
Right.
Which ultimately means financial suffering on behalf of myself and my family.
All right. All right, let's bring it down here then. How can churches and pastors support the medical practitioners in their congregation and in their communities in the months and years ahead? Tell us a little bit, what can we do?
Inform people. I think there's levels that we have to inform people at as well. I'm really frustrated at times with how little message is getting out to the churches, and that's something that we've worked on. I've been working on that for 4 years. Get the message to the churches. People need to know 30% of evangelical Christians in the States think it is just fine to participate in euthanasia. And I think it's because they just haven't been informed about what does God tell us about this. So we need to really let our congregations know, why is euthanasia wrong from a biblical perspective. I mean, there's lots of other reasons, societal reasons why it's also a problem, and it's helpful to know that. But the biblical perspective is so important.
You would like for pastors and churches to, in essence, educate their congregants about issues related to the value and dignity of human life and the challenges being faced by physicians with respect to this particular legislation. Now, Josh, if I can bounce that to you, a lot of pastors that I talk to are actually nervous about using their ministry platform to advocate for any particular political position on a piece of legislation. And some of that has to do with the fact that, you know, they listen to the briefing, or they're aware of, you know, the average Canadian pastor knows more about the religious liberty laws in the States than they do in Canada, because they listen to the briefing, they watch CNN. And so they've heard of this thing called the Johnson Amendment, where, you know, if you use your pulpit or your ministry platform to advocate for specific legislation, you can actually lose your tax status. That is not the case in Canada. And so speak to the average pastor out there and let them know whether they can use their ministry platform to educate their folks with respect to specific legislation.
Well, I think I'll speak more as a pastor than as a lawyer. In Acts 20, Paul exhorts the Ephesian elders to preach the whole counsel of God.
Right.
And he points to his own example as saying, I did not shrink from declaring to you anything that was profitable.
Right.
You need to pay close attention to yourselves and to all the flock, to care for the church of God, among which are Christian doctors, among which is Christians who may struggle with these questions themselves about whether they can end their own lives because the pain is just too much. So I would encourage pastors to not be afraid to teach the Bible, to trust that the Bible has power. It is the Word of God, and it is through the Word of God that God accomplishes His purposes. Persecution may come, but persecution is not the worst thing we could face.
Right.
The worst thing that we could face is already taken care of on the cross.
Right.
And so we have nothing to fear.
Amen. Now, Diane, I know you wanted to mention there's a website right now, www.canadiansforconscience.ca, and we'll display that so folks can get connected. What's that about, and how would that be helpful?
Canadians for Conscience came out of the lawsuit and out of the fact that there are many nursing homes and institutions that are also being forced to participate in euthanasia, offering that in their settings. And so this is a coalition of Christian organizations and Catholic organizations that have come together and are lobbying the government, the medical Ministry of Health, and the colleges. And on that website, you can go there. There are sample letters that you can send to your MP, your MPP, the Attorney General, the Minister of Health in your province. And it's all set out there. And the more numbers we have, the stronger our argument is before the courts. I think that this is, I mean, we're fighting for doctors' conscience, but if we lose here, this is a much bigger issue for everybody's conscience rights.
Yeah, this will have an impact on how charter rights are balanced going forward. All right, thank you.